The cold, sterile air of the cryo chamber stirred as the hum of ancient machinery powered to life. Alice Thorne's eyes fluttered open, the frost on her body dissipating in a slow, steady stream. Her breath fogged the glass of her cryopod, and for a moment she thought she was still trapped in a dream, suspended in a time she no longer remembered. She tried to move but felt the weight of years, no, centuries, pressing on her limbs. Her muscles were stiff, aching, as if they hadn't been used in far too long. Alice inhaled sharply, her mind reeling as the disorienting sense of time slipped through her grasp. What had happened? Where was she? The pod's door hissed open with an eerie mechanical sigh, and she stumbled out, her vision blurry, the world around her flickering into focus. She wasn't alone. Around her, other survivors were slowly emerging from their pods, men and women of all ages, their faces etched with the same confusion, the same horror. Their clothing was a uniform, basic, military-grade jumpsuits that bore no insignia, no traces of the world they had once known. They were Earth's last hope. Or perhaps they were all that was left. Alice's mind struggled to pull together the fragments of memories, but the haze was thick. A faint image of a war-torn Earth, a promise of survival hidden deep underground, the Bastion. Yes, that was where they had been sent. But for what reason? Who had built this place? A sudden, powerful rumble shook the very walls of the chamber, cutting through her thoughts. The hum of distant machinery became a low growl, followed by a burst of static that echoed in the control room beyond the cryo chamber. What was that? A voice whispered. Alice's eyes snapped to the sound. The room was dimly lit by blinking console lights, but those were not the lights of a thriving base. Something was wrong. Another jolt, a violent shake that rattled the very foundations beneath their feet, and then the blast. A sharp, shuddering explosion that sent the survivors sprawling across the cold floor. The walls buckled inward, a screech of metal as the sound of distant gunfire and alien screams leaked through the walls. Alice staggered to her feet, adrenaline surging through her as she grabbed a nearby terminal. The screen flickered on, showing fractured images of Earth's surface. Cities crumbled into ruins. Strange alien ships hovered over the devastation, the kind of spacecraft no human had ever seen. She cursed under her breath. The Jaloth. She remembered their name. The conquerors who had ravaged nearby systems, leaving only death in their wake. They were coming. Earth was no longer a forgotten relic. It was the next target. Everyone, get up, Alice shouted, her voice hoarse but commanding. She moved toward the control panel, frantically flipping switches. Her mind, hazy from centuries of stasis, struggled to reconnect with her old instincts. She had once been a soldier, one of Earth's finest, trained to lead in the most desperate situations. The skills came back slowly, like a distant echo calling her back to action. Suddenly, a deep, guttural voice boomed across the intercom, startling them all. Humans, you are not forgotten, but your time has come to end. Alice's blood ran cold as she recognized the voice of the Jaloth's leader. This was inevitable, the voice continued. Surrender now, and we will spare you. Resist, and you will perish. The survivors, still disoriented, looked to her for guidance. Alice didn't hesitate. We'll fight. This is Earth's last stand, and we won't let it fall without a fight. She turned to the nearest door, and the last of her memories clicked into place. The Bastion was Earth's final weapon, built to withstand a catastrophic assault, but it was not just a fortress. It was a living machine capable of devastating power. As the walls began to glow with a strange, pulsating light, Alice realized the truth. Earth's strongest weapon wasn't its military. It was the Bastion itself. And now, it was awake. With one last glance at the survivors, she raised her voice. We're going to make sure they regret underestimating us. Let's show them what humanity is capable of. The air outside the Bastion vibrated with the unmistakable hum of alien engines, a sound that sent shivers down Alice Thorne's spine. Her eyes scanned the cracked screens in front of her, showing the alien ships hovering like dark vultures over the remains of Earth's cities. There were dozens of them, each more massive and intimidating than the last. The Jaloth were here, and they were not coming in peace. "They're already deploying ground forces," one of the soldiers muttered, his eyes wide with fear. He was a young man, his face still fresh with the remnants of sleep, and now he was forced to confront the end of the world. Alice didn't have time to comfort him. "Get to the armory," she snapped, turning toward the control center with a grim sense of urgency. "We're going to need every weapon we can get our hands on. And keep your wits sharp. We're not just defending Earth anymore. We're about to show the Jaloth what happens when you pick a fight with humanity." She moved quickly, her boots clanging against the metallic floors of the Bastion as she rushed to a terminal. Her fingers flew over the control panels, activating dormant defense systems that were designed to protect Earth from all but the most impossible odds. The walls of the Bastion flickered, glowing with pulses of energy as a deep resonant hum filled the chamber. Outside, the Jaloth ships began to descend toward Earth's surface, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere like predatory birds. A sudden warning flashed across Alice's terminal, accompanied by an ominous message. "Energy signature detected. Class Omega threat. Jaloth invasion imminent." Her heart skipped a beat. Class Omega threat. That was a level of danger reserved for the most formidable of foes, beings capable of bending space and time to their will. These were not just invaders. They were conquerors, seasoned warriors who had razed countless worlds, each one bending to their will. "Activate Bastion defenses now," she ordered, her voice steady despite the rising tide of panic inside her. She knew the Jaloth had underestimated humanity once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. The massive doors to the Bastion's command center opened with a groan, and the survivors began to pour in. Alice's mind was already racing, thinking several steps ahead. Every human here, every single survivor, had to be ready to fight. The Bastion wasn't just a sanctuary, it was a weapon, and it was only as powerful as the people who wielded it. "Get the mechs ready," Alice called out to the engineers stationed at the back. "We need them on the surface in 5 minutes. Prepare the fighters. Launch the drones. I want everything operational. Now." In the chaos of the command center, orders were given, systems activated, and Earth's last hope began to unfold. As the Bastion's exterior defenses powered up, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. The Jaloth didn't just destroy planets. They were masters of manipulation, with technology that defied logic. They were ruthless, and they had come prepared. A crackling voice suddenly echoed through the intercom, interrupting her thoughts. It was the Jaloth leader, his voice deep and menacing, dripping with venom. "Humans, your world is ours. Your last refuge is a pitiful fortress, and we will break it, piece by piece, until nothing remains but the ashes of your civilization. Surrender, or your extinction will be swift." Alice's hands clenched into fists, her blood boiling at the arrogance in the alien's voice. Her mind raced with the growing sense that the Jaloth didn't fully understand what they were up against. Earth's people were more than just survivors. They were fighters, and they would not be cowed. "Let them come," she muttered under her breath. She knew the Bastion's power was beyond anything the Jaloth had encountered, but they had to act fast. Time was slipping away. As the first wave of Jaloth landing craft descended, their engines roaring in the sky above, Alice turned toward the exit. The survivors were ready. They had no choice now but to fight, and to show the universe that humanity's greatest weapon was not its technology, but its will to survive. "We've waited too long for this," Alice said, her voice steady as she turned to her team. "This is Earth's time. We fight back, or we die fighting. Let's make sure they regret ever coming here." With that, the last of humanity's defenders stepped out into the harsh alien world, ready to prove that even Earth's final bastion could become a weapon of unimaginable power. The first wave of Jaloth forces hit with a deafening roar. Heavy footsteps reverberated through the Bastion's thick walls as Alice and her team raced toward the surface. The mechs, massive war machines powered by the Bastion's ancient energy cores, hummed with barely contained force. Each one was armed with plasma cannons, shields that could withstand the strongest of blows, and enough firepower to level entire cities. But as Alice clambered into the cockpit of one of the mechs, her mind wasn't just on the battle ahead. It was on something much darker. The Bastion, as impressive as it was, held a secret she hadn't yet fully understood. It wasn't just a weapon. It was alive. There were whispers among the survivors, rumors of strange occurrences, of whispers from the walls themselves. The ancient technologies embedded within the Bastion were far beyond anything humanity had ever created, far more than even the Jaloth could have imagined. The power it held was vast, and yet Alice couldn't shake the feeling that the Bastion wasn't entirely under their control. She glanced at the console inside the mech. It displayed data feeds from all over the Bastion, and her eyes narrowed as one report in particular caught her attention. Core anomaly detected. Unstable energy fluctuations within primary reactors. What the hell? She muttered, reaching out to tap the screen, but the interface fizzled and flickered for a brief moment. The Bastion was reacting to the Jaloth. She knew that, but why was it so unstable? The mech's AI buzzed, snapping Alice back to the present. Mech online, Commander Thorn. Surface breach in 15 seconds. Alice took a deep breath, pushing the unsettling thoughts to the back of her mind. There was no time for doubt now. Earth was being invaded. The Jaloth were trying to crush them, and humanity's survival depended on every single one of them. The doors to the Bastion's launch bay opened, and the mechs thundered out, their massive feet crunching against the rubble of Earth's ruined landscape. Alice's mech scanned the battlefield as it moved into position, the Jaloth's dropships already deploying soldiers. Their armored forms, tall and spindly, emerged from the smoke and chaos of the landing zones. They were brutal, their weapons capable of incinerating anything in their path. The first wave of invaders was merciless, but the Bastion's forces met them head-on. Plasma shots collided with alien shields, explosions rocked the landscape, and Alice's mech stomped forward, firing at will. Each Jaloth soldier that fell was replaced by another, their numbers seemingly endless. But it wasn't the battle outside that occupied her mind. It was the strange, unsettling feeling that something was watching her. A chill ran down her spine, and for a moment, her vision blurred. It wasn't just the pressure of the battle. There was something else. The Bastion's core was reacting to her, drawing her closer to its heart, like a siren calling her toward the unknown. Alice, look out. A voice yelled through her comms. Her thoughts snapped back to reality just in time to see a Jaloth war machine charging toward her. She threw her mech into evasive maneuvers, sidestepping the alien's brutal assault and firing a barrage of missiles. The Jaloth machine exploded in a shower of debris, but Alice wasn't focused on the victory. She was focused on the unsettling presence inside the Bastion. Her eyes darted to the readouts on her console again. Core stability deteriorating. Anomalous energy signatures detected at lower levels. What the hell is going on down there? She muttered, her pulse quickening. The Bastion was alive, and whatever it wasn't just reacting to the Jaloth. It was reacting to her. The ground trembled beneath her feet as the Jaloth intensified their assault. The enemy was relentless, their tactics shifting as they adapted to the Bastion's technology. Alice's team fought bravely, but there was a sense of growing unease in the air. Something about the Bastion, something inside the Bastion, was starting to turn. Suddenly, an alert flashed across her screen. Unauthorized access detected in lower levels of the Bastion. Energy surge detected. Unauthorized access. Alice's voice was laced with disbelief. Who the hell is down there? The sound of her comms crackling to life answered her. A voice, distorted and hollow, whispered into her ear. It wasn't human. You should not have come here. Alice's stomach lurched. The Bastion wasn't just a weapon. It was something else, something far older than humanity itself. And now it seemed to have its own agenda. She gritted her teeth, the weight of the discovery settling in her chest. She had to get to the core. She had to understand what was happening before they all became its prisoners. All units, fall back to the Bastion's interior, she commanded, her voice cold with determination. We have to end this now. As her mech thundered back toward the Bastion, Alice knew one thing. The fight for Earth had just taken a turn into the unknown. And the Bastion, Earth's last hope, was about to reveal a truth far darker than any of them could have anticipated. The rumble of the battlefield faded as Alice's mech crashed through the Bastion's inner doors, the heavy metal doors groaning under the impact. Inside, the once sterile corridors of the underground fortress now pulsed with an unnatural, ominous glow. The hum of the Bastion's power systems had shifted to a rhythmic thrum, as though it was breathing, alive with something far more complex than just machinery. Alice's thoughts were consumed by the cryptic message she'd heard moments before. You should not have come here. The words haunted her, an echo reverberating through her mind as she exited her mech and stepped into the darkened halls of the Bastion. The survivors, those who hadn't already been deployed to the front lines, were gathered near the control rooms, their faces drawn, eyes full of confusion and suspicion. Something had changed in the air. And it wasn't just the weight of the invasion. It felt like something else was stirring within the Bastion's depths. Alice's footsteps echoed against the cold metal floor as she moved through the corridors. She was met by Sergeant Donovan, one of her most trusted officers, but his normally steady face was clouded with unease. Commander, we've received troubling reports, he said, voice low and hesitant. Something is off with the lower levels. We're detecting energy fluctuations, but it's not the Jaloth. There's something else. Alice nodded sharply. I know. We've got to get to the core. Now. Donovan hesitated for a fraction of a second, his gaze flickering behind her, but he quickly masked it with a grim expression. Understood. But we've also received word that there's been a breach. Her heart skipped. A breach? What do you mean? Donovan started, but before he could finish, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed from behind them. Alice whirled around just in time to see a group of survivors, led by a man she didn't recognize, storming into the control room. They were carrying advanced weapons, much more than basic defense gear. Commander Thorne, the man said, his voice smooth but cold. We need to talk. Alice narrowed her eyes. He was dressed in the same uniform as the rest of the survivors, but there was something about him that felt off. A certain calculated detachment in his posture, like he was more a puppet than a leader. Who are you? Alice demanded, her hand instinctively resting on the sidearm at her hip. The man smiled, a thin, almost predatory grin. I am Captain Voss, and I've come to offer you a deal. Deal? Alice's voice was sharp with suspicion. We're in the middle of an invasion, Captain. The Jaloth are assaulting this planet, and the Bastion is our last defense. What could you possibly want? Voss's smile didn't falter. You're mistaken if you think the Jaloth are our only problem. The real threat is the Bastion itself. The words hit her like a physical blow. What do you mean? She demanded, but before he could answer, an alarm blared through the halls, the familiar wail of a security breach. Donovan's eyes flickered to the door. This isn't the time for a negotiation. Voss. But Voss raised a hand, his calm demeanor never cracking. I'm afraid the time for negotiations has long passed, Commander. We've taken the necessary precautions. The Bastion is too dangerous. Alice's gut twisted in disbelief. You're saying you've been working against us from the inside. I've been working for us, Commander, Voss replied, his voice laced with an unsettling confidence. The Jaloth are nothing compared to what this place can do. We have to control the Bastion before it controls us. Alice's pulse quickened. What are you talking about? She demanded again, her voice rising. We're fighting for survival. For humanity's future. Voss shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. You don't understand. The Bastion wasn't just built to protect humanity. It was designed to contain something. A force far older than Earth, far older than any of us. We've been playing right into its hands. Elise took a step forward, the words choking her, but Donovan stepped in, his hand on her arm. Alice, we need to deal with the breach. We can't. Voss didn't let him finish. With a single motion, he activated a hidden console on his wrist, and the walls of the control room hissed open. A dozen armed men in black tactical gear poured in, weapons aimed at Alice and her team. Betrayal. The word echoed in Alice's mind as she realized the gravity of the situation. Voss wasn't just a traitor. He was a part of something far bigger than she had imagined. And now, the Bastion's secrets were out, and not everyone was on humanity's side. With a sickening lurch, the Bastion's core shifted, its energy systems destabilizing further. And the truth struck her. It wasn't just the Jaloth they were fighting. It was the Bastion itself. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Commander, Voss said, his voice cold and final. Join us, or stand aside. Alice's hand hovered near her weapon, her mind racing. The Bastion was on the verge of unraveling, and the people she trusted had just become her greatest threat. There was no time to waste. The world, her team, and her mission were all hanging by a thread. And it was fraying fast. The room seemed to close in on Alice. The walls, once a symbol of humanity's greatest hope, now felt like a cage, the air thick with the weight of betrayal. Voss's men, armed and ready, were spread out across the control room, their weapons trained on her and Donovan. Alice's fingers twitched toward her sidearm, but she knew it was a futile gesture. The odds were against them. Voss, watching her every movement with a predatory calm, stepped forward. It doesn't have to be this way, Commander. We don't have to destroy the Bastion. We can control it. Think about it. This place could give us power beyond anything humanity has ever imagined. We could rewrite the very fabric of reality. Alice clenched her jaw, her mind racing. She wanted to strike, to take down Voss and his men, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. She had to think this through, or they would all be dead before they had a chance to fight back. The Jaloth were still out there, and the Bastion's unstable core was ticking down like a time bomb. Control it. Alice's voice was low and dangerous. You're playing with fire, Voss. No one controls the Bastion. It was never meant to be wielded by anyone. It's not a weapon. It's a prison. Voss raised an eyebrow. A prison? For what? The Bastion was designed to contain something older and more powerful than us. I've seen the data. It's in the archives. Earth was never meant to have this technology. We were just supposed to survive. Voss's smile faltered for a moment, and in that fleeting second, Alice saw something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, quickly masked by his usual calm. I've read the same archives, Commander, but the Bastion was never just a prison. It was a weapon that can reshape the future. Humanity's future. Alice's stomach churned. She couldn't let him have it. Not after everything she had learned. Not after seeing what the Bastion was capable of. It wasn't a tool for control. It was a ticking bomb. And if they let it go unchecked, it would destroy everything, including the people trying to harness it. What happened to you, boss? Alice's voice broke through the tension in the room. You were one of us. You fought for Earth. He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. That was before I saw the truth. Before I understood that the Jaloth are nothing more than a distraction. They're a symptom of the real problem. The Bastion is the answer. The Jaloth want to conquer us, but they don't realize that we can conquer the Bastion. The true power lies within these walls. Alice felt the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. The Bastion, alive, conscious, whatever it had been designed to contain, whatever ancient force lay beneath its surface, it had begun to stir. It wasn't just a defense against the Jaloth. It was a reminder of Earth's past, of the things that humans weren't meant to tamper with. And now, it was beginning to break free. Suddenly, the room began to tremble. A low, resonant rumble echoed through the corridors of the Bastion, followed by a sharp crack. The lights flickered, and the walls groaned in protest. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat. The core was destabilizing faster than she'd anticipated. "We've run out of time," she said, her voice cold and commanding. "The Bastion's waking up. Whether you want to control it or not, it's going to take us all down if we don't shut it down." Now, Voss's eyes narrowed. He seemed to be weighing his options, his gaze shifting from Alice to Donovan and back again. Then, with a fluid motion, he turned to one of his men, nodding sharply. "Seal the doors. No one leaves until we've dealt with the situation." Alice's instincts kicked in. She lunged for the nearest console, but before she could reach it, the armed soldiers closed in on her, their weapons drawn. "You think you can stop us?" Voss said, his tone dripping with disdain. "You're too late, Commander." Alice's eyes locked on the door to the lower levels, the path leading to the Bastion's core. She knew what had to be done. The moment the door sealed, they would be trapped. And the Bastion's power, if unchecked, would soon destroy them all. "Donovan," she said, her voice low but fierce, "get to the core. We need to shut it down before it's too late." Donovan hesitated for only a moment, then nodded, a determined look crossing his face. "On it, Commander." He sprinted toward the entrance, his weapon raised, as Alice fought off the soldiers closing in on her. She drew her sidearm, firing in quick, controlled bursts to keep them at bay. The room erupted in gunfire, chaos swirling around her, but all Alice could think about was getting to the core before the Bastion's unstable power tore them apart. The seconds felt like hours. Every step forward was a battle. But Alice knew that in the end, it wasn't just the Jaloth or Voss's treachery they were up against. The Bastion itself had become the enemy. And only one thing was certain. Either they controlled it, or it would destroy them all. The pounding of Alice's boots against the cold metal floors was the only sound in the dimly lit corridor. Behind her, the chaos of the control room seemed to fade, as though she were stepping into a different world altogether, one that was far darker, far more treacherous. The walls, once pristine and reflective, were now streaked with strange, shifting patterns that seemed to pulse with an eerie light. It was as though the Bastion itself was alive, and it was trying to communicate with her, or perhaps warn her. Alice's mind raced. She had to get to the core. Donovan was already ahead of her, sprinting toward the lower levels where the Bastion's most critical systems were housed. But even as she pushed forward, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something within the Bastion, was watching her, pulling her closer. The door to the lower levels loomed ahead. It had always been heavily secured, a vault within a vault, and for good reason. No one, not even the highest-ranking officials, were allowed to enter without explicit clearance. The secrets buried in these depths were meant to stay buried. As Alice approached the door, a cold wind seemed to sweep over her, rushing from the cracks around the metal frame. It felt wrong, unnatural. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the control panel. The door flickered, and for a brief moment, a whisper in the back of her mind told her to turn back. But she couldn't. Earth's future depended on stopping the Bastion from collapsing in on itself. With a sharp intake of breath, she pressed the button. The door hissed open, revealing a narrow passage leading downward. The air inside was thick, charged with the strange, low-frequency hum of the Bastion's power systems. It was more than just energy. It felt like a pulse, as though the Bastion itself was beating, breathing. Donovan was already several steps ahead, his pace quickening as the door closed behind Alice. He didn't speak, but there was an urgency in his stride, a determination that mirrored her own. They were running out of time. The further they descended, the more the temperature seemed to drop. Their breath fogged in the air, and a strange metallic taste lingered in their mouths. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the Bastion was resisting them, unwilling to let them get any closer to its heart. Then, the ground beneath their feet trembled. A deep, resonant growl vibrated through the very walls, and the lights flickered again. The whole structure seemed to shudder, as though it was alive, reacting to their presence. Alice's hand instinctively reached for her weapon, but there was no enemy here. The enemy was the Bastion itself. "What the hell is happening?" Donovan muttered, his voice tight with fear. Alice didn't answer. She couldn't, because she didn't know. They reached the final door, the threshold that led into the Bastion's core chamber. The door was massive, twice the size of any other they'd encountered, and covered in symbols that Alice didn't recognize, but that she knew were ancient, older than anything humanity had discovered. This was where it all began, where the Bastion's true purpose was buried. Alice placed her hand on the control panel, and the door groaned open, revealing a vast chamber filled with hums and crackling energy. At the center stood the core, a towering, swirling mass of dark energy encased in a transparent shell. It pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting shadows across the walls. The core was alive, its energy shifting, swirling, as though it had its own thoughts, its own desires. Alice took a step forward, but the air around her grew thick, almost tangible. It pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. The ground trembled again, more violently this time, and she heard a voice, a whisper, almost inaudible at first, but growing louder. "You cannot stop it." Alice's heart stopped. The voice wasn't human. It was the Bastion, or at least something within it. It was speaking directly to her. "You were never meant to control me. You are nothing but a puppet. We are one." The words reverberated through her mind, and a strange sensation flooded her chest. It wasn't just fear. It was a sense of connection, as though the Bastion was pulling at something deep within her, unlocking memories she didn't recognize. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog that was settling over her thoughts. No, she couldn't lose herself to this thing. She had to stay focused. The future of Earth depended on it. "Donovan," Alice said, her voice strained. "We need to shut it down. Now." Donovan's hand hovered over the control panel next to her, but his face was pale, his expression tight with fear. "Alice, something's wrong. The Bastion. It's reacting to us. To you." Alice swallowed hard. "I know. But we don't have a choice." She reached for the terminal, pressing a sequence of commands into the console. The core seemed to pulse in response, its energy rising, the chamber around them shaking. It didn't want to shut down. It wanted to consume. Then, without warning, a surge of energy exploded from the core, knocking Alice and Donovan back. The world went black. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a voice. "You think you can control me?" Alice's body jerked awake as the darkness lifted, her head spinning. She was lying on the cold metal floor, gasping for air, her heart pounding in her chest. The world around her was distorted, the once sturdy walls of the Bastion now flickering, warping. Every surface seemed to ripple as though reality itself was coming undone. Donovan was beside her, struggling to push himself up, his face pale and covered in sweat. His eyes locked with hers, wide with disbelief and fear. "Alice, what the hell just happened?" Alice shook her head, still dazed, but her instincts kicked in. She pulled herself up, trying to steady her breath. "The Bastion," she muttered, her voice hoarse. "It's not just a weapon. It's alive." Donovan looked around, eyes darting over the ever-changing chamber. "Alive? What do you mean?" "This place is reacting to us like we're connected to it." Alice's pulse quickened. She had felt it, felt the Bastion reaching into her, speaking to her, pulling something out of her. She wasn't sure if it was her own mind or the Bastion manipulating her thoughts, but whatever was happening, It was clear they were no longer dealing with a simple military installation. The core, the source of the Bastion's power, had shifted. Its swirling mass of energy was now a pulsing, breathing entity. It was no longer just a structure. It had become something more, something unfathomable. And it had chosen them. Donovan staggered to his feet, still looking dazed. What the hell did it do to us? Alice's eyes narrowed as she studied the core. The room hummed with a low, sinister vibration. She could feel the weight of its presence, heavy and suffocating. There was no escaping it now. The Bastion was aware of them, and it was playing a game, one they hadn't been prepared for. "I don't know," she said, her voice steadying despite the chaos in her mind. "But whatever it is, we need to shut it down. Now, we can't let it control us." Donovan nodded, but his eyes were clouded with doubt. "How?" "It's like the Bastion is feeding off of us. It's inside us now. It's in our heads." Alice felt a sharp pang in her chest, a sudden clarity slicing through the fog that had settled over her thoughts. "It's not just in our heads. It's using us." She clenched her fists, determined. "We can't let it win." The voice echoed in her mind once again, a low, mocking whisper. "You think you can stop me? You are part of me now, Commander. You are mine." Alice winced at the weight of the words, but she fought to push them out of her mind. She couldn't let herself be consumed by the Bastion's will. The future of humanity depended on her resisting its call. "We need to destroy the core," she said, her voice firm. "We have to end this now, before it fully awakens." Donovan nodded slowly. "We could try to overload the system, hit it with a pulse strong enough to destabilize the core. But that's going to be risky. We don't know what'll happen once we trigger the shutdown sequence. We could make it worse." Alice glanced back at the core, the swirling mass of energy now growing more violent, rippling with unnatural force. The room seemed to bend and shift, as if it was alive, feeding off their fear. "Then we'll take that risk," Alice said, her voice steely with resolve. "We've come this far. We're not backing down now." Without waiting for Donovan to respond, she moved toward the control console at the edge of the chamber, her every step heavy with the weight of the decision she was about to make. The console was surrounded by strange symbols and alien technology that made her gut twist. There was no telling what kind of backlash they would face, but she knew one thing for certain. The Bastion would not be allowed to consume Earth, not if she had any say in it. Her fingers flew over the terminal, inputting a series of commands to begin the shutdown sequence. The lights around the room flickered violently, casting long shadows that seemed to warp and distort it as the energy inside the Bastion core began to hum louder. A deep, guttural voice filled the chamber, reverberating through the metal walls. "You cannot destroy me. You are too small, too weak, to understand what you are tampering with." The ground shook beneath them, the vibrations intensifying. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the air grew thick with energy. Alice clenched her teeth and fought against the overwhelming pressure in her mind. "We don't need to understand. We just need to survive." Her fingers slammed down on the final command, and the room erupted with a blinding flash of light. For a moment, the world stood still. And then, all hell broke loose. The core, in its final defiance, released a shockwave of energy so powerful it tore through the chamber, sending Alice and Donovan flying. The Bastion's walls groaned and cracked, the room around them beginning to collapse. As Alice struggled to get to her feet, the voice of the Bastion whispered one final warning. "You cannot escape. I am everywhere. I am everything." The ground trembled again, and Alice knew, with terrifying certainty, that the true battle had only just begun. Alice's head was spinning. The shockwave had sent her crashing to the ground, and for a few agonizing moments, everything around her seemed to blur. Her body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, but she forced herself to rise. The world around her was chaos. The Bastion, once a symbol of humanity's hope, now felt like a tomb. The walls shuddered as the very foundation seemed to groan in agony, like a wounded beast on its last legs. Donovan was already up, his face grim as he scanned the room. His weapon was still in hand, but there was no time for combat now. They needed to act, before whatever force inside the Bastion fully awakened. The core's destabilizing, Alice gasped, pushing herself to her feet and steadying herself against a trembling wall. It's going to implode, but we need to get out of here. Now. Donovan's eyes darted to the flickering consoles around them, their lights blinking erratically. The strange hum of the Bastion's energy systems was rising, louder and more erratic, as though the very heart of the installation was thrashing in its death throes. The dark energy of the core pulsed in waves, vibrating through the floor beneath them, trying to force its will upon them. But Alice wouldn't let it. Not now. She took a deep breath and sprinted toward the exit, her mind focused. The countdown was ticking in the back of her mind. Seconds were slipping away, and the entire Bastion would be gone in minutes if they didn't get out. Donovan followed close behind, the sound of his footsteps in sync with her own. They reached the corridor leading back to the surface, the ground buckling beneath their feet as the entire Bastion groaned in agony. The walls were alive with flashing lights, the energy inside the structure surging, feeding on the very foundation. Alice didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Behind them, a low, pulsing rumble intensified into a deafening roar. The voice of the Bastion boomed in their minds again, harsh and full of venom. You cannot escape. This is where you belong. You are part of me now. You cannot outrun destiny. Alice gritted her teeth, pushing her legs harder, her lungs burning with every breath. Keep going, she shouted to Donovan. Don't stop. We have to outrun this thing. The tremors underfoot grew more violent. The walls split open in jagged cracks, exposing the energy coursing beneath the Bastion's surface. Alice could feel the heat radiating from the core, its power surging toward a catastrophic explosion. But she knew that even if they managed to escape, the shockwave would likely level everything in its path. They had to get to the surface. They had to warn Earth. Finally, they burst through the door leading to the central elevator shaft, where the ascent to the surface began. But as they reached it, the Bastion seemed to pulse with an overwhelming force. The elevator doors slammed shut just as Alice reached out, blocking her path. No one escapes. The voice was more powerful than ever, filled with malice. The ground beneath them cracked open, and debris rained from the ceiling as the Bastion's energy began to breach the surface. Alice and Donovan barely dodged a large piece of the ceiling that collapsed just in front of them. Alice looked around frantically, then spotted a maintenance hatch on the wall. Over there, she shouted, pulling Donovan toward it. With one swift motion, she ripped open the hatch, and they climbed inside, crawling through narrow tunnels as the whole structure trembled around them. Every footstep was a race against time. Every breath was a battle against the crushing weight of the Bastion's collapsing systems, but they kept moving, desperation and determination fueling their every action. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a final access point. The surface was only a few hundred meters away, and beyond that, the horizon of Earth, waiting for them. But the very ground beneath their feet was starting to buckle, and Alice knew the Bastion was about to unleash its fury. They could hear the roar of the core's final eruption, a deafening wave of energy that washed over everything in its path. Alice, Donovan shouted as they reached the surface. Hurry. With one last burst of strength, they emerged into the open air, just as the ground trembled violently beneath them. The Bastion's core exploded with a blinding flash, a wave of destruction that shot into the sky. The explosion sent a shockwave across the landscape, knocking them both off their feet. The earth cracked and trembled as the Bastion, Earth's final stronghold, disintegrated into nothing. The explosion lit up the sky, sending a plume of smoke and debris into the atmosphere. Alice lay on the ground, gasping for air, but a strange feeling of relief washed over her. The Bastion was gone. Whatever it had been, Whatever power it had held was now erased from existence. As the smoke cleared, Alice sat up, her mind numb from the chaos that had unfolded. She glanced over at Donovan, who was still catching his breath, his face pale but alive. "We made it," he said, his voice rough but filled with a sense of victory. Alice nodded slowly, the weight of their survival sinking in. Earth was safe, for now. But the true cost of the Bastion's existence had left its mark on her. They had fought not just for survival, but for something deeper, for the future of humanity. And though they had escaped the Bastion's wrath, the scars it left on Earth, and on themselves, would never be fully erased. But one thing was certain: humanity had learned its lesson. Never again would they let the Bastion or its power control them. They had survived. But the battle for the future had only just begun.